Good morning. It's Teresa. We're back in the garden, and we are still in John chapter 18. We're going to be in John chapter 18 for still yet one more week after this. I will not rush through this period of time where Jesus is put on trial. There is just too much to make you aware of. Even though we've studied it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this is the last time we're going to be studying it. And I want to make sure that I haven't left any stone unturned. Last week, we were left with Jesus being arrested and taken to Annas. If you will remember, Annas had been taken out of the position of high priest by the Romans. But the Jewish people still considered him high priest, as that job title lasted for life. But when the Romans came in, they felt that giving someone a title for life would give them too much power. And also, Annas refused to give up the right to kill people when he felt that they needed to be killed, according to Jewish law. So he was deposed, he was taken out, and his son-in-law Caiaphas was put in his place. But Caiaphas was more or less just like a puppet high priest. Annas was still the one calling the shots. Annas hated Jesus because 2 different times Jesus had come in the temple and disrupted his money-making projects of people only being able to offer up sacrifices that were raised by the priest, namely him, and exchanging whatever money they brought, because they lived in different countries, coming to Passover or Feast of Tabernacles or one of the feasts that God had told them to come together and celebrate in the temple with him. And they had to give their tithes and offerings. And Annas said they couldn't just give money from foreign countries. They had to exchange their money for temple money. And he charged them quite a bit of money, almost 3 times the amount, to give their tithes and offerings. This was not right. Jesus told him it's not right. And Annas was very angry that 2 different times Jesus had gone in and turned over the money changers' tables and chased out the people that were selling the sacrifices. Remember, they were doing this in the courtyard that was on either side of the temple, which was the only place Gentiles could go and worship God. So Jesus said this is a house of prayer, not a money market exchange, and not a market to sell animals. And he had disrupted Annas's cash flow. So Annas had a real beef to pick with Jesus, and he wanted to see Jesus killed. He hated Jesus. He had arranged for Jesus to be brought to him first, but Jesus spoke the truth all the time. And Annas was trying to make Jesus testify against himself, which was against Jewish law. They broke so many laws. And when Jesus told him, why don't you go get somebody that heard what I was saying? Jesus also knew that the priest had been in there listening when he was teaching in the synagogue, saying, I didn't do anything in secret. Everything was out in the open. And one of the temple guards had slapped Jesus across the face. And Jesus said, why are you slapping me? I'm just asking for witnesses to be brought in. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? And Annas couldn't say anything because it was the truth and nobody else could. So Annas sent him to Caiaphas. And when he was sent to Caiaphas, Caiaphas was basically trying to get him to incriminate himself also, and getting him to say that he was the Son of God, which according to Jewish custom, no human was supposed to claim they were God. And Jesus was claiming he was God because he was. To say you were the Son of God is like saying you are the product of God. You are God himself. We don't take an orange and get it from the store and bring it home and slice it up in sections and call it something other than an orange. So Jesus came from God. He was God. So calling himself God was no different than trying to separate out what I just gave you the example about an orange. We don't we don't split God apart, even though he is a Trinity, God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We don't separate him. He is still one, just like an orange is still called an orange. So Caiaphas was exasperated with him, and Caiaphas and his friends just left and went to Pilate, took him to Pilate. Pilate is who we're going to talk about today. They brought Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early in the morning, and they themselves did not enter into the headquarters, in case they should be defiled. They were so careful to hold every jot and tittle of the Jewish law, you couldn't go into a Gentile's house without becoming defiled. And if you were defiled, you had to wait until evening and then do ceremonial washings to make yourself clean and pure Jewish again. Pilate was a Gentile. They would not go into his house. Yet they were dragging the Son of God there, trying to have him murdered when they knew he had done nothing to deserve being killed. So they wished to avoid defilement because they wanted to eat the Passover. And the Passover started at 6 o'clock, and they wouldn't have time to do the ceremonial washings before Passover started. So they would not go into Pilate's house. Pilate had to come outside, and it was in the morning. Remember, Peter had defiled Jesus like 3 o'clock in the morning, and now this was probably about 4 o'clock in the morning. So they go and they're banging on Pilate's door, and Pilate came out to them and said, What are you doing? What charge are you bringing against this man? And they answered him, If he had not been an evildoer, we would not have handed him over to you. So they were kind of sassing Pilate right there. And you don't wake someone up in the middle of the night and then start sassing them. So Pilate said, You take him back home and judge him according to your laws. But then the Jews said to Pilate, It is not permitted for us to put anyone to death. Now, this happened so that there might be a fulfillment of the word of Jesus, which he spoke to the disciples, indicating what manner of death he would have. The Jews could only stone someone to death. And the prophecies before, and even what Jesus said that he would be lifted up. The Romans lifted people up on a stake, on a cross. And so this was how Jesus had to die. This was what God wanted. So in order to fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke in indication of the kind of death he was going to die, Pilate went again into his headquarters. He left the Jewish people and Caiaphas outside the gate, and he took Jesus with him. And he said, Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered, Are you asking me this because you've discovered it yourself, or are others telling you this about me? Well, Pilate, again, is not very happy because he has been woke up early in the morning, and he said, I'm not Jewish. I don't know all your customs. Well, first off, a person that is governing a body of people, it would be really good for them to know the customs of those people so that they could judge rightly. But he's saying, Am I a Jew? Your own countrymen and the chief priest handed you over to me. What have you done? Pilate wanted to know, what have you done to make them so angry that they want to put you to death? And Jesus said, My kingdom is not of this world. So he's answering Pilate's question, but in a roundabout way. Pilate is only interested if he's claiming to be king of the Jews, because if he is, then that would be considered insurrection of Roman law, because the Romans only honored their emperor Tiberius as God, not as anything other than king. And anyone else who was claiming to be king would be heresy, would be trying to uproot the Roman law. So Jesus is telling him, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom was of this world, my servants would have fought to prevent me being handed over to the Jews. He's talking about his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. But as it is, my kingdom does not have its source here. His kingdom is with God, and he is going to have an earthly kingdom here on earth when he comes back that second time. So Pilate said to him, so you are a king then? He's just trying to decipher whether or not he's calling himself a king. He's not really understanding this thing about, my kingdom is not of this world. And Jesus said, you're the one saying I am a king. The reason why I was born and came into the world is that I should bear witness to the truth. And Pilate is really intrigued by this. Jesus says that he was born into this world and came into this world to bear witness to the truth. Pilate later on asked him, what is truth? Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And so Pilate, he's a manly man. He doesn't want anyone telling him he doesn't have the ability to do something. So Pilate says, what is truth? When Pilate said this, he again went out to the Jews and said to them, I don't find any fault in him. You have a custom that I release one person to you at the Passover time. Don't you want me to release this King of the Jews to you? And they all started screaming and shouting, not this man, but Barabbas. Barabbas was a notorious man. He had tried to bring insurrection against the Roman government, to incite people to revolt against the Romans. Barabbas was Jewish. Barabbas means son of a father. And Jesus was often called Barabbas Jesus, which means son of the Father. But these people were shouting that Barabbas, a known killer, a murderer, a robber, an insurrectionist, be released to them instead, not Jesus of Nazareth. So Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. Pilate thought that maybe if he had him beaten really bad, that would be enough for these Jewish people. Now, this scourging was something that was normally done right before someone was crucified. There was a whip that had 3 leather thongs on it, and it had pieces of metal and pieces of bone that had been sharpened, and pieces of glass. And they would put someone around a whipping post and tie their hands so that their back was really tight. And there would be 2 guards that would be both whipping. One from one direction that would make diagonal slashes this way, and another from another direction that would make diagonal slashes that way. And it would rip and tear the skin of the person being scourged. Sometimes the people bled to death. This is very gross things to talk about. But I'm explaining to you the type of punishment that Jesus was going through. It was very barbaric. Sometimes the razor cuts would cut the flesh so deep that the person's organs were exposed. This is a horrible thing to talk about, but it's what happened to Jesus. A lot of times a person was weakened so much from losing so much blood that when they finally did get to the cross, they died quickly. And that was one of the purposes for this scourging. Pilate had no thought of crucifying Jesus, but he thought if he was scourged that the Jewish people would be satisfied. So Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and put it on his head. There was this plant that grew in Israel that was had very long, inch and a half thorns on it they didn't bend. They were like metal. And they grew on a vine, and this vine could be woven into a wreath. And so these soldiers made Jesus a crown and pushed it down on his head. And these thorns poked into his head. It was painful. Everything Jesus went through was painful. Scriptures say that he endured this pain so that when we are sick and when we are having pain, we can go before Jesus, and he knows what that's like, and he can heal us of our sicknesses and our pain. So they put that crown of thorns on his head, and they put a purple robe on him, and they kept coming to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they dealt him repeated blows. They put a bag over his head and tried to get him to guess who it was that had hit him. It was a game that the Roman soldiers played. There in Jerusalem, there really wasn't much need for the Roman soldiers. The only time that they were really of any use was when Passover came, because a lot of times there were riots. The people of the Jewish culture remembered what Passover was about, being delivered from the Egyptians and delivered from their slavery and the horrible things that happened to them for 430 years. And Moses delivered them out of their slavery. And this Passover was done to remind them how Jesus had delivered them. But they were angry at people who had been in domination over them, like the Egyptians. And the Romans were now dominating them. And so many times at Passover, the Jewish people got angry and they would try to revolt against the Romans. And that's why Pilate was in Jerusalem, because it was Passover. He wasn't normally there. His headquarters was in Caesarea, and he preferred Caesarea. But he had come because of Passover. And these Roman soldiers were just entertaining themselves with Jesus. This was a game that they played, trying to get him to guess who it was. And if you see somebody coming towards you to hit you, you can kind of duck. But if you've got a sack over your head, you don't know when a blow is going to hit. So they played this game with Jesus. And then Pilate came out again and brought Jesus out. He was so beat up, you couldn't even see who he was. He was unrecognizable. Pilate did this on purpose. He was appealing to the compassion of the Jews. So he says, "See, I bring him out to you because I want you to know I still find no fault in him. Look, I've had him scourged." And Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said, "See the man." So when the chief priests and officers saw him, instead of having compassion, they started screaming, "Crucify him, crucify him." And while Pilate was having Jesus scourged, the priests they were working the crowd, trying to tell people, if you want to still keep coming to the synagogue, when he brings him back out, you better start shouting, crucify him, because that's what we want. And if we don't get what we want, you won't be able to come and worship God. So all the people started screaming, crucify him. This hatred that the priest and the leaders had for Jesus had gone way beyond reasoning. When a person has so much hatred for someone, they don't think right. They just want their way, their anger and their hatred. I hope you never hate someone that much. And if you do, go before God and ask him to get that hatred out of you. It is not healthy for you or anyone around you. It makes you not think clearly. Even anger makes you not think clearly. That's one of the reasons why it's important that we study this. So we have no excuses. See what my shirt says? We have no excuses for holding this kind of stuff inside of us. So he says, you take him and crucify him, if that's what you want, because I find no fault in him. And the Jews said, we have a law that you put down on us. We have a law, and by that law he should die, because he made him, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God. But Pilate wasn't interested in holding up Jewish law. He was only interested in holding up Roman law. So when he heard this, he was even more alarmed, because he realized how much the Jews hated him. And he knew it was because the Jews were jealous of him, jealous that he had the truth. Remember, I told you Pilate was really enamored by Jesus, and he was intrigued by Jesus. Jesus was talking about he came here to tell the truth. And now the Jewish people are saying that he claimed to be the Son of God. And the Roman people were very superstitious about any gods and making them mad. So Pilate is not wanting to make any god mad. He went back into his headquarters again, and he took Jesus with him. He's trying to find a way out. He's trying to defer his responsibilities. So he says, where do you come from? He's wanting to know if he comes from God. And Jesus didn't answer him. And Pilate said, you refuse to speak to me? Are you aware that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? But Jesus answered him and said, you would have no authority against me whatsoever unless it had been given to you from above. That is why he who betrayed me to you is guilty of the greater sin. Jesus is letting Pilate know these people that brought him to him, they're going to be held accountable. And Pilate doesn't want that. He doesn't want that kind of authority. And from that moment, Pilate tried every way to release him, but the Jews kept insistently shouting, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Pilate had already gotten in trouble by the emperor for several different things. We've talked about him before. When he first came into the procurator job in Jerusalem, he had these banners that had little emblems of Tiberius on top of them. And the people were angry, and they followed Pilate back to Caesarea and was saying, you must take those off. You can't come into the holy city of Jerusalem bearing an image. God says we're not supposed to have any images of anybody. And he said, I can put you to death for doing this. And so they all laid down and pulled their robes back and said, then put us to death, because we're not going to allow this in our holy city. And he took the standards down and took the emblems off those standards, those banners. But then he went in and took money out of the treasury. He didn't like the way the water tasted in Jerusalem, and he wanted to bring better water and bring an aqueduct to Jerusalem. But he went into the temple treasury and took money, millions of dollars out. There was a lot of money in the treasury, so he could build this aqueduct. The people were very angry. The Jewish people were very angry at him for this. And then he brought in other banners that had Tiberius's face on the banners. And the people went to the emperor and complained. And the emperor told them not to bring those banners back into Jerusalem again. So the Jewish people knew that Pilate was on thin ice with the emperor, Tiberius. There was also a coup against Tiberius, and the man that brought that coup against Tiberius and Pilate were friends. And so even though Pilate was a very good organizer and a very good governor, and Tiberius had appointed him to be procurator over Jerusalem, he still could get in some trouble and be taken out. And so they're telling him, if you don't crucify this man, you're not Caesar's friend. Every man who makes himself a king is an opponent of Caesar. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out. He took his seat on the judgment seat in the place that is now called the pavement. In Hebrew, it's called Gabbatha. It was the day that all the lambs were being slain in preparation for Passover. And Jesus would be slain this day as well. Remember, he's our Passover lamb. It was about 12 o'clock midday, and he said to the Jews, "See your king." And they shouted, "Away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And then Pilate handed him over to be crucified. Pilate was more concerned about keeping his job than having a relationship with Jesus. No excuses. We are held responsible for what we do with Jesus, what we decide, whether to be in compliance with the truth of Jesus or not. We have no excuses. We will be held accountable. Pilate was held accountable. He later got in more trouble with the emperor for taking out a bunch of people in Syria when there was a revolt, but he never got brought to trial because Tiberius died. We don't know what happened to Pilate. Maybe Tiberius had him put away secretly. Don't know. But Pilate didn't have the courage to stand up for Jesus when he knew Jesus was an innocent man. Other Gospels tell us that he sent him over to Herod, which he did not like Herod at all, but when he found out that Jesus was from Nazareth, Herod had rulership over that territory, and he sent him over to Herod, and Herod couldn't find any fault with him either. Herod sent him back, and Pilate had to do something. And so he just gave up, gave in, and gave the Jewish people what they wanted. The priest, at least. Sometimes we do that. We give up and give in because we don't want to be accountable for standing up for what's right. I want to encourage you to stand up for what's right. Stand up for the truth. Pilate said, "What is truth?" Other accounts tell us that his wife had sent him a letter saying, "Have nothing to do with this innocent man. I've been plagued with dreams all night long." But he didn't have the courage to stand up. I pray in the name of Jesus you have the courage to stand up for Jesus. It's an important thing. And I want you to remember, we have no excuses. So what you do with Jesus is a very important thing. Next week, I'm going to be talking to you more about the hatred of the Jews and more about where they were coming from. But for today, we're going to end. I love you very much, and we'll continue John chapter 18 next week in the gardens.